So I want to do a little bit of review, and then after we've done a little bit of review, because I really want to make sure you have this concept and the terminology, we're going to look at CSS selectors. So here's the review. What is a rule set? Pause the video and answer it. And what's it made up of, right? What's a rule set made up of? So a rule set is how we format with CSS. It's rules. It's a set of rules that we apply, right? To like, hey, change something. So a rule set is made up of a selector. What do we want to change? Well, we want to make this thing change, the paragraph element or the H1 element, whatever it is. So it's made up of a selector and then a declaration block. And the declaration block, a block is any code between curly braces. It's a block of code. And a declaration block is going to have inside of it declarations. Now each declaration is made up of what? So that's the second one. What's each declaration made up of? All right, so hopefully you pause the video. And declaration is made up of a property and a value, right? And it has to end with a semicolon. All right, so that's the basics of CSS. We have rule sets. Rule sets are made up of selector and declaration block. And then inside the declaration block, we're going to have declarations, and each declaration, property and value. I should probably do it like this because it's flipped in video. Property and value. I've been trying to remember to start with my right hand because here I'm reading left to right, but on the screen that's going the wrong way. This is left to right for you. It's kind of a trip. It's flipped. Like I don't know. So anyhow, I'm trying to get that. So that's what a rule set is, right? It's the selector, declaration block, inside the declaration block, declarations, and then each declaration is a property set to some value, ends in a semicolon. All right, so now we're going to talk about selectors. So here are the 5 selectors that we're going to talk about. Tag, like a paragraph tag or H1 tag. An ID, we'll see what an ID is. A class, we could use a class selector, we'll see what that is. Attribute selector, and a pseudo class. Right? And for pseudo class, we have all these different choices. These are some of the choices we have. And then we're also going to see CSS comments. So let's get started looking at that, and we're going to look at 016 and 017 to see these things. So here we are in 016. I'm just going to start with comments. Okay, so we don't even need to see that page. But here's a CSS comment. That's it. And to do that, right, notice it's like, and that's a common C family programming language type of comment. And again, in WebStorm, I could do that with just // and it starts a comment. // So that's a comment in CSS. Done with that one. All right, the next one is tag, ID, class, attribute, pseudo class. So for selecting something with a tag, right, let's look at the CSS. Here's just a single tag, paragraph. We could also do with multiple declarations. So we've looked at color. Here's width and border. So let's see how width and border change our paragraphs. So for the first one, this is what it looks like. This is without width and border. And for the second one, this is what it looks like. This is with a certain width. And then you can see there's been borders put around the paragraphs. And so that one is like this, width, property, value, and the px means pixel. So pixels are the little individual elements which make up a screen. So if we look at the resolution of a screen, or an image, we'll look at the resolution of an image because I have one of those really handy right here. Be kind, MJ. We'll go with Michael Jordan. And so the resolution here is 750 by 737. That's 750 pixels wide and 737 pixels up and down vertically, right? And so those are just little dots, and each dot is a certain color. And when we look at each dot of a certain color from far enough away, it looks like an image to us. But if we were to zoom in on that, we would actually see each little square of color. So those are pixels. So this means 500 pixels. So 500 of those on my screen translates to this. That's 500 pixels wide. And here's the border is 1 pixel wide. So that's 1 pixel right there. And it's solid and it's black. I could also do like dashed, you know, and then refresh this. And now I have a dashed border. So you can see how you get to start doing some pretty cool design, building things. Like, how do I want things to look? And you could just look up the definition, MDN CSS border. MDN CSS border. And you could read about border and the different settings and, dash, solid, how you change those to get the border to look differently. So this is having multiple declarations. That's the second file here. We've looked at this first one and the second one, and let's look at multiple selectors. So here I have multiple declarations, and I also have multiple selectors. So in this one, in the previous one, I was just applying it to the paragraphs. Now I'm going to apply it to my list items and also H1. So when I look at this, it's put a border around everything pretty much and given it a width, but it didn't do it around the image. But the point is I wanted to show multiple selectors separated by commas, right? So here's my rule set. My rule set is made up of a declaration block and also a selector or selectors. And so I've selected different tags here. I'm saying apply it to these tags. So that's using tags as a selector. We could also use IDs as a selector. And so here's how you would select an ID. Well, an ID is just some name you create. And then you could apply it to something. So here in my paragraph, I gave it this attribute with this value. And the attribute is ID, and the value is promote. And so I just created that, and I gave it this word. I created the word. The attribute ID is something that exists and you work with HTML and CSS. You can only have one ID per page. So let me just show you this one working. So it promoted this last paragraph because I said, hey, on this last paragraph, I'm going to give it the ID of promote. And now for the selector, I'm saying target the ID with the name promote. And the way you say I'm targeting an ID is with the pound sign. So that's the way you do it. You can only have one ID per page. So this would be incorrect because I have two promotes. And you can see my browser is giving me a little red underline saying you have a duplicate ID reference. You can only have one ID per page. So that's using an ID as a selector. And then there's something called a class. And so a class is like with an ID, we did a pound sign to say, hey, this is an ID I'm looking for. With a class, we use a period. And so I'm looking for anything with the class emphasize. And so in here, I could give different elements the attribute class, and then give it the value emphasize. And I just created that word. And so I could give a class to as many different tags as I want, right? So I could say, hey, this is part of the class, emphasize. This is part of the class, emphasize. And so that's the difference between an ID and a class. And you might wonder, like, why? Why can an ID only do one and a class can do many? That's just the way it was made. If you only want to target one thing, use an ID, because you're just targeting one thing, and then you won't accidentally target many things, giving it that one piece of formatting. And so here you can see with the class, I've targeted two sentences, two paragraphs, and made them each red. So that's using a class as a selector. So we have a tag, we have an ID, we have a class. We could also target elements on our HTML page with attributes. So this is what that looks like. So for any paragraph that has the attribute content editable, right? So that's an attribute that we can apply to a paragraph. Here's content editable. I've applied that attribute. And the default value of content editable, the default value of that is true. And so I don't need to put in true if, when something has a default value of true. I could just leave it like that. And so this paragraph has this attribute content editable. And so that's going to be targeted by this selector. This selector is going to say, hey, I found it. I'm going to make it red and give it a border. And so when I look at this page, whoops, I got to go over here. When we look at this page, I see that this has been read and been given a border. Now I'm just going to take a little bit of a tangent here and teach you about content editable, because it's totally cool. When you give something the content editable attribute, you could then edit it right in your browser, right? So people could edit it. So that's just something that, you could get creative with later on. And I could edit this content. Now at the end of this video, I'm going to show you a cool newspaper trick. So you saw here as I refresh, it goes back to neutral. And I refreshed with Command-Shift-R. Command-Shift-R in the Mac will do a refresh, just as if I'd click that button. So I'm going to show you a cool newspaper trick right at the end of this video. It's kind of a cool thing to do. All right, with newspaper websites. And so that's using a selector of attribute, right, to target something. And the next thing we could target, CSS to our HTML pages with a pseudo class. And so here's an example of a pseudo class. So for the anchor tag, anytime you hover over it, change the color to red. So a pseudo class has some functionality to it, which is kind of cool. So here you can see that my underline is blue until I hover over it. And then whoa, right? I just got a rollover effect and it turns it to red. So that's really nice for interactivity. And you can see the list of different pseudo classes that you could work with, right? So you could change it when it's been visited. We use the hover. You could use any of these different pseudo classes right here. All right, so we've learned about border. We've learned about width. We've learned about the different, when we have this deal right here, our rule set, and our rule set has a selector and then a declaration block, right? So we've learned about the different selectors we could use. We could use the tag. I'll make this big just to emphasize it. We could use ID. We could use a class. We could use an attribute. And we could also use a pseudo class, right? And those allow us to target elements on or tags on our HTML page and then apply formatting to them with a declaration block or with different declarations. All right, so now for this last thing I want to show you. So you can stop watching the video if you want. Yeah, like good chance, right? After I told you that there's this really cool trick or technique. So it made me think of it when we were doing content editable. But if I go to the New York Times or any web page, and again, you only want to do this privately because this is could probably get you in trouble. and I'm going to qualify the way I'm teaching this as teaching you tools. So as a developer, you know how to be aware of things and defend against things and recognize when somebody has done this. And I'm not teaching this to you so that you could be malicious. I'm teaching this to you so that you could be a good steward in the web, internet, technology, programming community and help people, not hack people. All right, so you might, what you could do is you could right-click any of these, right? And I'm just looking for, something that might be interesting to right-click. But you just right-click one. I'll choose this one. You could choose Inspect. And so it just brought me to this text. And it says, Iran says it released 4 Americans in a prisoner swap. And so I've highlighted that text. And now I could just change that. And research shows that Jessica is the best wife ever. Right? And then when I go back and I look at this page, research shows that Jessica is the best wife ever. So, that could be kind of weird if you were to take the New York Times and actually change it and then send somebody a screenshot and say, look at what happened in the news, right? And do it in a malicious way. That's not good. Excuse me. But where it is kind of cool is like for your significant other to be like, on their birthday or something. It only works once. I've already done it with my wife. But you say, oh my gosh, have you seen the news today? Check it out. And you could edit the article and everything. And then it could be like a sweet little thing where you're like, hey, check it out, man. Happy birthday. You're the best wife ever. Oh, this messed me up. Okay, so that's a little trick you could do. And then that's also the different CSS selectors and CSS comments.